It's my pleasure to introduce our panel. Mark Mason, Managing Partner and Head of Professional Advisory at Lotus Blue Consulting, and also Edward Estrada of Estrada Legal Consulting. I will turn the floor to our presenters now for further introductions.
Thanks, Andre. Appreciate it. Great to be here with all of you today. Again, as Andre said, I'm Mark Masson, Managing Partner of Lotus Blue and Head of Professional Advisory there. We've been doing work with major law firms for, well, really decades. And what it really centers on, I'll give you a little bit of background about me and the firm very quickly to understand who you're hearing from today. Centers on really how the firm grows profitably and transforms to work efficiently for both attorneys and the business, but also for clients. So we're always looking for the win-win, and I think one begets the other. And so part of what we do is try to understand how the firm performs best for its clients, where its capabilities are, how to use those best, but also to really interact with the environment, the industry, the macroeconomics, and the client environment to make sure that there's some seamless delivery and meeting of needs. And in particular, over the past probably year, but definitely over the past 6 months, there have been some trends that Ed and I are going to talk about. And we had been thinking a lot about how do you respond to trends that are really almost a convulsion after the past couple of years. Really the sort of slipping demand, which we'll get into. But as an example of some of our work that might give you a little bit of context on the ground, and you'll see this kind of come in our discussion today, as things kind of get difficult in the market around growth, you turn inward to really look at performance. And some of the things we do is we leverage analytics and we leverage data and the ability to enable the front line to perform even more effectively. And so what we've done is a couple ways is to provide unique views to practice leaders, practice management in the field, also to finance professionals, to both see some of the trends more real time, more in advance of when they happen through several metrics, and to make clear decisions on those. Not all of them are growth oriented. You can imagine collections, heat mapping and scoring collections, and giving a almost kind of a formulaic approach to how you reach back out and close the gaps in your revenue cycle management. So that's just a little bit of an intro to who we are, who I am, and some of the projects we might do within firms. Ed, do you want to give a little bit about your background?
Mark, thank you. It's good to be here. We look forward to questions. We have a question link. So if you have any, please send those through, and we'll address those either at the end of the presentation or during the course. As Andre mentioned, my name is Ed Estrada. I started a legal management consulting firm following 25 years in private practice. I brought to that consulting work a view of the legal industry from a number of different perspectives. Over the course of my career, I worked in small regional firms, national firms, and then eventually an industry-focused global law firm. At the same time, I had the opportunity to work in different management roles, serving as the global chair of our business strategy function within a firm, leading the New York office, leading our financial industry group, as well as co-leading our U.S. litigation practice. And in the course of those different positions and over those 25 years, I've worked with lawyers, and now I'm working with law firms, primarily law firms, in how to navigate different economic cycles, much like the work that Mark and his team does at Lotus Blue. We have a similarity that we look for inefficiencies within different business models, in different processes and procedures. And while, especially these days, there's a lot of discussion about the new shiny technologies, new objects, what we're focusing on here today are some of the core strategies that you can employ to improve profitability, especially, as we say, in a lower demand cycle and with tighter budgets. So what we plan to speak about over the course of this webinar are effective strategies to allocate your people, your time, and your money to mine for operational inefficiencies, address them and correct them, and improve performance long term. As I mentioned, over the course of my career in the last 25 years, we've seen a number of different down cycles. And looking back to 2008, obviously the Great Recession and a major global economic impact. They're working internally with my law firm. We wound up looking at, we broke down all of the different revenue linked processes, collections being one of them, pricing being another, how we're using our people and allocating resources, and where we're making smart, informed, as Mark's team is great at doing, data-driven decisions to lead the business out of lower demand, lower revenue times to achieve similar profitability, or as close to it as possible, compared to better performing economic cycles. It's the type of approach that we think can uncover a number of different efficiencies and can lead to business growth and can lead to stronger teams. So with that as the background of who we are and what we do, we're going to turn to today's presentation. What we expect you will have at the end of this webinar are a few key areas of a law firm business that can be focused on to improve performance. And not only that, you'll be able to walk away with actionable tactics that you can employ, you can examine and employ to reach these improved performance metrics. So Mark, with that, I can hand it back to you so we can begin the presentation.
Great, and thanks, Ed. So, as Ed mentions, there's, oops, can I advance it here? Sorry, I can't. Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay. So, as Ed mentioned, obviously we're at a different time this year and perhaps late last year than we had been in the previous 2 years. We all sort of experienced this really deep concern in 2020. Most businesses did, as to, boy, is this going to be a year where we're going to lose so much money, right? And we have to restructure or rethink and shrink and restart businesses and firms. But what happened, as we all can reflect on, is that we had actually really healthy years in terms of revenue and in lots of ways profitability, because travel and entertainment and operational expenses went way down. In fact, relatively near zero, as it turns out, and didn't come back for a long time. That was one component. The other component is that the industry, both law and other professional services firms, actually stayed quite buoyant. Firms often lead recoveries. They don't often weather the storm into challenging times like this, like the pandemic, quite as well or quite as consistently and long term as those couple of years. But I think the uncertainty surrounding all of that really led to the need for firms and advice and advisory and people with broad experience. And then all of a sudden we're dealing with a recession, with sort of Ukraine and some uncertainty in the market there, inflation, and we're talking about things like layoffs a lot, right? We're seeing many of many firms being publicized for having fairly significant layoffs. There are many more that have them that simply aren't being reported on. Specifically, some are doing it very differently. They're focusing on business services, or they're focusing on attorneys, but sort of more from a performance or sort of hours and productivity based in different pockets of the firm. With that context, we stepped back, Ed and I did, and said, look, one of the things that's challenging in these times is that firms really need to continue investing in the business, but it's very, very difficult to do when you're presented with not slipping, but significantly declining in some pockets of the business demand, as well as rate pressures, and this constant push for additional salaries. You'll remember not so long ago, the talent flow was so significant that it was hard just to get enough people in the door to cover the work. So we focused our thinking here around what we would call no and low cost solutions. Now, they're not low effort or low hours or low focus. Certainly there's a quote unquote cost, an opportunity cost internally if you do them yourselves. And in some cases, you'll want advisors, but the tactics themselves are ones that can be done without, multi-million-dollar investments. And some cases, they're just shifting your focus and resource, because now is the time to really invest in some of these strategic operational priorities rather than let them go. And also we thought, hey, the layoffs done too early, done without enough thought about the hurt to the business ultimately in the next 6 months, 18 months, 24 months, we'll get an air gap in attorneys being able to deliver, is really sometimes the worst way that you can lower expenses in a time where you have slipping demand. So, speaking about what's on the slide here just a little bit is some of which I've talked about, but, we've had a really long run of positive results, rates being pressed higher, sometimes being challenged, but oftentimes being accepted and sort of pressing the revenue and profitability of firms. Again, 20 and 21 was an unforeseen global issue, but also an unpredictable positive in terms of the business from a revenue and profitability standpoint for all the reasons I just mentioned. But these mass layoffs in some ways, both business services and attorneys, have been maybe necessary to some to right-size the business in the most immediate term. But it does also make you think even further conservatively about the business in the next 3 to 6 months. And those that are able to find ways to invest strategically are going to be the ones who really come out of this stronger for their clients. And think about it that way too, stronger for clients, not just for the business. Those two things go hand in hand. So Ed, there's a couple things specifically that you might want to highlight, excuse me, on slide 2 and 3 about the dynamics of the market.
Yeah, no, Mark, it's a great, you make great points and you really highlight how unique the market is, right? All the unique attributes that came out of the COVID period, one of which surprisingly was, increased demand, increased profitability, because firms didn't have a significant amount of operating and other expenses in their budget year to year, which they, certainly in 2020 that they'd actually budgeted for. As we've seen, like in the last, year or so, 9 months, 12 to 12 months, as you start to see, decreasing demand in some key practice areas. The other kind of unique scenario that you touched on was you have decreasing demand. You have operating expenses that are adding in as people begin to travel, entertain, become more active, and we start to build in those expenses. But then the cost of talent, we touched on talent a little bit. The cost of talent has just absolutely skyrocketed. So you've got waning demand, and even in some of those same practices, firms were trying to build up, trying to gather talent in a low demand environment, which is which can be a successful strategy, but that really increased the cost of expenses. So when you got to the end of 2022, and you're starting to see it now as firms are announcing their results for 2022, you see it's a very mixed. So far, it's been a very mixed bag of results. You have firms kind of all over the board. You have firms that are increasing. They've managed to increase revenue, but profitability has dropped, which makes sense because of the added expenses. But this trend of expensive talent is one that we don't think is going away anytime soon. So importantly, the informed choices that firms have to make, as Mark was saying, is you have the smaller budgets. You're projecting shortfalls on revenue, either against budget or year on year. And firms now are taking very different approaches on how to fill that gap. Do you resort to layoffs? If you do, are you focusing on the timekeeper side, the lawyer side? Are you thinking about your business professionals? And what we're offering is not necessarily a third way, but what we think is an absolutely integral piece of analysis in any of that decision making. I think while performance-based layoffs are always a consideration, need to be a consideration, we think looking internally, looking at your processes, looking how you can make your processes more efficient is one of the necessary starting points. On this side, you see our references to increasing operating costs last year. That's going to plateau at some point, but it's not going away fully this year. And we'll talk about technology a little bit later in more detail. But importantly, those firms that needed to catch up from a technology basis in order to perform in 2020 and after had a lot of unexpected costs. And investment in technology became a question of what technology do we need just to perform. Technology is ideally looked at as what investments can we make in order to make our businesses more efficient. And that's the kind of thinking, the kind of analysis we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation.
And I think the first thing to really think about here, right? And we sort of thought about different segments of the business that we could focus on uniquely and go a little deeper. Collections came up to be the first one, and that's the first place in a revenue cycle that you can really attack. It's the thing that we try to get partners to kind of keep on top of and have hygiene on them throughout the year. It becomes more and less concerning depending on how the business is doing, and towards the end of the year, of course. There's also practice group management and organization that is thinking about how do you organize the practice groups, but also how do you enable them? How do you enable them with informed insight, with ways to see the business, their part of the business, and its fit within the broader business more helpfully, with more insight, with more actionability? How do you understand sort of the ways that you can deliver to and generate more opportunities with target clients? And sort of the other part is marketing, business development, and knowledge management. Those things kind of go together in a way that can really enable the business, but sometimes is less focused on building. At times when it's high demand and everything seems to be going swimmingly. Not that we don't need that, but we really don't necessarily drill deep on how we can enhance and build a bigger, better platform there. And then it comes back around and sort of bites us when demand is slow. And then data and technology is another one that we are going to address in a series of articles we've had. And you see it's not out yet, but we'll take each of those sort of in their own place, if you will. They also interact and integrate with one another. But as individual topics, we can spend a decent amount of time on those and understand what we can do on each, and sort of this no and low cost solution focus to enhancing those parts of the business. As you can see, this is a very natural phenomenon. It doesn't just happen in law. Excuse me. It doesn't just happen in law firms. It happens in pretty much every business, and pretty much intentionally, which is when we see a potential cash flow slowdown or a dip in the business and demand coming, we're going to lengthen the amount of time that we take to pay our bills. Not necessarily outside of the contract, not necessarily, sort of nefariously, just we're going to take a bit of time. We're going to stretch out that cash flow scenario. And you can see that happening in the first half of 2022. There's nearly a 5%, a little over 4% lengthening of the collection cycle, right? When you add that to the fact that the amount of time you've got from the time you do the work to the time you verify it, to the time you bill it, and it gets to the client through whatever technology and portals that they have, then the clock starts and they're lengthening the cycle. You have a long time and lengthening time between doing the work and cash in the door. And that part right there can be really problematic in terms of just one, collecting it at all, but number two, really having the money to invest and keep things going and sort of operating the business with good efficiency from an operational perspective. The later you get the money, the less it works for you up front. The other thing is that when you look at just the AmLaw 100 and sort of Second 100, et cetera, you see that the bigger firms, right, miss out on a significant amount of a proportion of billable invoices, 12%, right? That owes to all kinds of things. It owes to time not billed, time written off, scope changes, all of that, but it also owes very much to collections and the inability or sort of lack of discipline or lower discipline around going and collecting. And so one lever here is to better the firm and to, again, it may just not be in 2 or 3 months. It might be over a year or two. If you improve the collection cycle, you have a lot more fluidity of cash flow, a lot more ability to invest, a lot more ability to compensate, and a better ability to just run the business without angst and concern and making choices like too much on the layoff front or too much on not sort of strategically investing. So this also just positions you to bridge the gap and to also collect more of what you've already done the work for. Now, there's a lot of angles here, as I mentioned. Ed's going to talk about a number of them, including matter and client acceptance, et cetera. So Ed, you want to take us through just a little bit of some of what angles we can take on collections and revenue cycle?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So when we're talking about collections here, and that's really jumping to the last phase of what is a collection cycle. What we do is we break down that collection cycle and look at all the interrelated processes within the firm, even firm culture, which doesn't show up. It's kind of built into these four key components. So we go back to the very, very starting point before a matter comes in, before work's been done, before it's been invoiced. So these four key components you see on the slide are matter and client acceptance, exactly that. Matter intake and setup, the process that's involved internally to open new matters, the delivery of legal services, and then finally invoicing and collections. I'm going to work through these four, relatively quickly, but enough time to give you a breakdown and some of the decision making, and some of importantly, I think some of the process either bottlenecks or inefficiencies that can creep in and affect the collections process. In our best case scenarios and best practices, firms and businesses will employ a strict, disciplined process for the types of matters and clients that are accepted into the firm. The type of work, whether it falls within true specialties of the firm, whether it's core to the strategy, the price point, the teams that are going to work, that will be working on that. All of that should be part of your matter and client acceptance processes. Clear distinctions between matters that will be worked on and matters that won't be worked on as a firm are necessary. I know there's often the thought that if we let in a whole bunch, some of that will develop into 6, 7, 8-figure clients. Repeated research shows that, while that may happen in very, very limited circumstances, it often doesn't. What it does do effectively is really, really clog the system, and the limited resources you have on the back end, the collections time, are spread too thinly out over more valuable clients and accounts that need to be collected. Your matter intake and setup process. So you've made the decision to allow a new matter from a client in the door. How quickly and effectively is that set up internally? How quickly can you generate a billing number, run conflicts, agree internally on rates for the matters? Importantly, agree on the timing for billing and who is going to follow up on just simply billing the client. Through that process, the matter intake and setup, you're probably beginning to begin work on whatever the legal work is required, for that matter. So as you're leading up to the delivery of legal services, that's a big impact on collections. How clear are the instructions given to the teams working on the matters? How effective and efficient is the billing? Are you staying in contact with the client to make sure that either billing budgets, if there is one, are being met or on track for? How clean is the process of actually developing the legal services? And then ultimately the delivery. Finally, in that process, we get to invoicing and collections. Best practices, timely time entry on matters, timely review of matters, and a very quick prompt invoicing following the finalization of the matter and the delivery of the work product to the client. Getting the bills out in a timely manner increases the realization you're eventually going to get. Once you deliver the bill, are you following up with the client? Are you speaking with them if they have any questions on the bill? And really importantly, internally with big firms, lawyers are very, very focused on doing the work. Some are better than others at following up on bills and asking for bills. But where does that ownership lie? And is it clear internally, who has responsibility for getting those bills paid? So within these four, key components that we're talking about, there's a number of sub-steps, but that all does need to be pulled apart to see where, where operations can be maybe streamlined and made more efficient to improve that final step of actually collections and getting dollars in the door. And there's a number of tactics that that we've utilized to help firms with that Mark will go through.
Yeah, and so I mean there are literally dozens of things you could do, but they really boil down to several things that matter. One is visibility. When you think about it, and these aren't tactics, but these are things that have to be outcomes of it. And visibility to the issue, if there is one, the size of the issue, and where the issue most lies. Same for anything, but certainly when collections, as Ed indicated, sort of, how should this work? Who should be responsible and accountable? And what happens if not? Really mapping that out is kind of one of the solutions there, but understanding the process and where it should go. There's often change management that has to go on. As well as some more advanced things, and can give you a deeper insight when you're ready. So one of the things that we all hear dashboard all the time here. What that really says to me is a way to visualize the challenge or the issue, the size of it, where it's happening, and drill into sort of the main root causes of the challenge. As an example. One real project that we had with a global firm was the context was, hey, I've got a lot of collections that are slowing down. The amount of collections that are aging, our A&R, aged A&R, is increasing. We can't tell if it's in one place or another without doing a lot of manual work. This is also always a fluid situation. Help me understand as a global CFO where I need to be involved, where my team needs to be involved, which ones to prioritize, etc. And this is, a very big firm with a lot of collections, a lot of invoicing, a lot of complexity about those terms and contracts. One thing that we did was very simple, and we sort of do a lot of is scorecarding, heat mapping, and visualization. It sounds like something people say about everything all the time, but the truth of the matter is there's really nothing simpler that can just say, here's all of what you've got going on. Here's where you've got bigger bills that are lengthening, not just long, but lengthening the time from which they used to pay if they're out of contract terms. Do we know if certain partners, certain parts of the business, certain clients are doing this across a lot of matters that they have, and it's becoming a bigger issue in one epicenter or multi-epicenters of the business? By the way, how do I get to those specific people, matters, clients, situations, and timing? Right? This is all about visibility, and it all may just be driven by the macroeconomic and industry trends, and there may be limitations to what the firm can do or partners can do, but oftentimes just seeing where to go, how big the problem is, allows you to zero in your likely limited financial professional resources, as well as the highly limited partner time to solve problems that will have great impact to the business. Nothing bigger to the business than collecting what you've already done. So that's one area that can really not only do it for the firm, but can cascade into all parts of the business. Another one is process mapping. Again, this all sounds very, not super elegant and exciting, but the truth of the matter, that is where things get efficient and effective from an operational execution standpoint. Knowing exactly what rates were applied, what the intended profitability was, making sure the time gets shorter or stays on track in terms of collections and realization, and then shining a light on, right? It's kind of governance in the sunshine, shining a light on where sort of write-offs, discounts, sort of other changes to the anticipated invoice and billing and pricing have been, so that we can understand why they happened and if we really ought to be allowing for that, or this is a unique situation. All of those things really are important, but nothing's actually more important than accountability. Knowing exactly where that issue has to stop, who has the oversight of it, who approves, disapproves, and on what basis. So that process mapping doesn't necessarily have to be a 20-page compendium of charts and detailed prose that describe this. It can literally be a 1 or 2 page type of version of this. Often, there's some complexity, but just doing the mapping exercise itself often drives a lot of diligence and discipline into the heart of it. So collections and process mapping are really important, but collections, dashboarding, visualization, and process mapping are really important. But if you have to change from what you're doing to something else, it's often difficult to get people to change, right? Whether or not you have detailed accountability. And Ed, you've been in a lot of situations where you've had to get people to move and change as an executive in a firm and now out on your own. And maybe you can give people a little bit of ideas about how you've done that well.
Yeah, and I think it's, whenever you're going through, any type of change management process, what you're trying to change, how visible of an issue that is, and which constituencies agree that it is an issue will determine where you go. So I think when you think about a law firm, you think about the collections process, I think there's 2 steps. One is, do you understand the efficacy of your collections process? Do you understand your realization rates? Do you understand where the write-offs are, whether they're pre-billing or post-billing write-offs? Because that very well may be a starter. There's a very significant percentage of AmLaw 200 firms that do not have detailed collections teams or processes with sole responsibility that have gone through this process mapping. So the starters are, do you understand that? And for firms that track it a little bit, they know what bills they send out, they know what they get back, so they have a general sense of they know what they're billing, they know what the revenue is received, so they have a decent sense of what the realization is, but they might not understand where they're losing dollars in that process. The starting point is, do you want to understand that? And if you do, the second step is, if you're not happy with what you're seeing in that analysis, the kinds of analyses that Mark and I do you want to change it? And it sounds like a very simplistic question, but it's really not. It's a decision point. If you want to change that, how do you go about doing that? And it's, I think as with any change management process, it's framing the issue. When we're talking about law firms, in the partnership, framing the issue, making clear whether it's comparisons internally or comparisons against market standards, how you're performing, emphasizing that performance can be improved through some changes, and then clearly showing what the benefit of those changes would be. Whether it's a 1 or 2% increase in margin, whether it's improving realization by 2 or 3%, whatever that change is, but taking through communication, through data-based analysis, sharing that information with your your internal teams to get people on board and then become ambassadors for, for the change you're going to go through. It's a very important step, because we can talk about tactics, all day long. We can give most firms a number of different, tactics to employ. But those tactics land differently in different firms. So it's a question of that change management process. Make sure that that's thoughtfully applied to your law firm, to the people that will be affected to it, and do that in a way that ensures integration of whatever change you're making, but with the goal looking forward that you will have best practices. The business will run more efficiently, and you'll have more net profit. Firms with more net profit can keep and attract talent better. They can invest in long-term initiatives and invest in technology, and most importantly, they can deliver better client service. That's one point that we talk about a good deal, in addition to all of the whatever the subject is, in addition to the other advice we're giving our clients.
Yeah, and great points. And often, if we can even build towards how it affects positively the individual you're asking to change, often that's a compensation discussion, but sometimes it's about how you run the business, how you grow the business. If you can boil it down to how that individual, or the collection of individuals, they each and collectively, sort of are better off. That's when you really move the dime on people. So, one of the things that's on the page here is building towards predictive analytics. And it's something that we thought we would just touch on, because it is something that we do a lot of, predictive analytics, AI, machine learning. And it's not the tool for everything, right? Let's just be clear. People want to talk about this and use it for a solution to everything. It can't be a hammer looking for a nail, but there are uses for this, and you'll have to, maybe build towards it. But there are some exciting insights and some really cutting edge, sophisticated ways you can look at things. As with anything traditional reporting, view, or analytics, or even just scorecarding, heat mapping, which I touched on before, of where to dig in and which ones to prioritize. That's sort of a looking back, right? It's here's what's happened, here's where we are. How can I decide where to dig in and problem solve on things that have happened? Predictive analytics is using those past patterns really to look forward and say, where do I think this is going to happen, right? It's all at once sophisticated math and technology, but on the surface, the concept of it is simply getting the data in order to have the lagging indicators and the sort of analytics for that. Once you do, you can really run patterns and allow the machine learning to see what might be coming, get ahead of it, and start either turning your team, your finance team, or your partners to what is likely to come, and maybe even getting ahead of that. What we're going to do here is transition to practice organization. But before we do, I understand there's, for the New York CLE, there's a code that we need to read. So I'm going to take just a moment and read that to make sure everybody joining us from New York is going to get their credit for this. I'm going to read a script here, so bear with me. It's just something that was given to us. So in order to comply with New York regulations, attorneys looking for CLE credit in New York will need to be able to provide a code. This code is not intended for the West Legal Ed Center audience, either live or on demand. I will read this code twice and only twice, and cannot repeat it or email it to you, so please make note of it. The New York State Code number is as follows: M as in mountain, E as in echo, the number 3, the number 3, the number 8, number 0, dash 3, 2, 7, 2, 3. Again, that New York State Code number is as follows: M as in mountain, E as in echo, 3, 3, 8, 0, dash 3, 2, 7, 2, 3. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and segue to practice organization and management. Ed, do you want to give us a little bit of an overview of this section here?
Yeah, so I think the backdrop and everything we're talking about, whether it's the COVID period, the demand cycle, cost and expenses coming back, and even just internal processes, needing to becoming more integrated and more complex internally as firms are growing. And when you think of, like the AmLaw 200 firms, certainly those within that group and others that have spread geographically that are certainly multidisciplinary. It gets back to one of the initial questions we asked, like, are you able to leverage like the collective strengths of your firm? And a big part of that is internal organization. How are your practices or industries structured internally to ensure communication, to improve collaboration, to effectively get those multidisciplinary teams out in front of your clients? It's one part of conveying information and aligning your thought leaders internally to then proceed against the different strategies that you've developed for your firm and for your business. And how are you positioning those teams to interact with your clients in the most effective way possible? Firm sizes and the amount of revenue that firms are generating wasn't even thought of 20 years ago. Roughly 20 years ago, we had our first $1 billion law firm, and we now multiple $1 billion law firms spread out across regions and markets. What we employ is a analysis of those capabilities, the substantive capabilities that law firms have, and how best can you effectively align those to benefit your clients.
Yeah, great. And so look, there's a number of places where the win-win can come in, right? Law firms knowing their clients, their talent much better is really important to that. And there's some ways we've experienced and been able to help firm leaders and practice management all the way up through C-suite and managing partners understand that better and where to focus in. And the first thing is client focus. So many firms, if they're developing a strategy, will think about where's the next office that they want to have, what industry is hot, which one should we get into, and those are all valid questions to ask and answer, to be sure. But one of the things that really creates unique value for a firm and for the partners within it is to understand sort of what really makes the client relationships that have grown over time, that are really healthy, that continue to be an embedded relationship within the firm rather than just sort of a one-off tactical every once in a while with this one specific issue, where they're more multidiscipline, multi-practice. That kind of embedded institutional client is understanding what's really worked. What kinds of, have you brought more people to the table in the right combination? Have they had the right administrative and client team leadership experience? Have you staffed it appropriately so that it's both profitable for the firm and also they get the right level of legal advice and sort of industry knowledge and expertise? Have you introduced other people through the firm so you kind of can see more of why that relationship has worked, more of what really is as everybody likes to say, the secret sauce of your particular firm? It is different combinations of things make it for a quality relationship. And you often find really interesting insights when you dig deeper. This is the place to use predictive analytics. This is the place to use some big data techniques and big data sets going down to the time card level and really building back up. A lot of people say, oh, it's too hard to do and we don't know how to do that and our data is messy. The truth of the matter is data is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be complete. It's never going to be perfectly easily accessible. The myth of the data warehouse is that if I just had one and I parked all my data in there, that great, I'd be able to pull whatever I want whenever I want it. In fact, it's the actual working with the data and producing insights that are targeted at business impact, in this case, knowing your clients and your relationship with them and what's worked is what helps to make a more perfect, not a perfect, but a more perfect data set and therefore more actionable insights. What you find here is, while you can easily maybe in your own mind and your gut say which ones should sunset, which ones should we maintain and grow, you can actually get down in and say, these are the patterns that we can recreate in the client base. One example I invite you to just take a look at on your own is origami.com. In the link there on the page, it's a way we've built a SaaS product to do this with incredible depth, and it will show you a bit of the art of the possible. One thing I'll leave you with here on the client focus is that everybody has a key client program of some sort, and more often than not, it's a top 50, a top 20, a top 100. And in the case of that number, it's mostly the clients paying the most money in fees. And in fact, most of them may have no more headroom or no more interest in giving work to the firm, or maybe they're already as embedded as they ever could be. Whereas most of the growth in your relationships and your target client profile are going to be in the middle, kind of where you can't see them buried unless you get underneath some of the data. So there's a lot of actionability there. Another part is talent focus. One part of this is just having the right talent. And this again goes back to how have you served clients, not only profitably, but with great client satisfaction. You can look back in your data and what you've done and say, these kind of projects with these characteristics, they look similarly, and we have staffed them very differently. Or we've staffed them very similarly, and has that worked, right? What's the partner non-partner ratio? What's the team makeup? How much expertise coming from what parts of the business? Or is it always the same people? And what are the outcomes of that? So linking outcomes to what you've done in the past. And that can also help really with pricing and the connection to value that the client experiences. If you're putting the right team on the field, you can both be profitable. A client can be excessively happy about the industry knowledge, the service, and the outcome on their side from a legal perspective. So cataloging is important. This is the thing to do when demand is slipping. What do we do? Well, we should build the business, know low-cost solutions, right? Get a better understanding of where people's existing talents, interests, experiences lie, and match those up with the work better in the future. Defining the client needs and expectations, thinking about that front end of the process with how matters get scoped and intake and initial client conversations, particularly for new clients. What do they expect? How can they express that? How can we match those expectations with needs, particularly from a talent deployment perspective? And then you can see, from a firm-wide perspective, a system-wide perspective, are there gaps? Are there gaps in things that we can deliver, or are there gaps in talent that we don't have, or emerging gaps that we need to fill over time? So identifying key client accounts really that aren't just your biggest accounts, I think is really important. Aligning those resources, clarifying the talent capabilities, and really, again, back to developing those processes that allow you to keep this up to date, right? And keep moving, keep sensing and monitoring here for what can improve, enhance the connection between your talent that you have and you bring in, the talent that you deploy, and how you deploy it against certain types of work. So those are a number of things that we can really focus in on. And Ed, do you want to segue here to the next part of this?
Yeah. So picking up, where Mark left off, you're looking at your talent, right? And you're thinking about that from from the client focus and the talent focus that Mark talked about. Importantly, on those client teams, like if you're focused on those growth clients, or obviously your largest clients, continuing to support them, and you have the capabilities, now you're confident that you've got the capabilities to achieve those goals that you have. There's the investment point. And, we touched a little bit earlier on investment in the form of, compensation, retention, attracting new laterals to the firm. But this investment, what we really want to talk about, a bit differently in this section and the next focus is, you have your clients, you're focused, you're focused on their categorization and their growth projections. You have the talent. How are you aligning firm resources to support and align with those decisions that you've made? Mark mentioned, key client accounts where they can often simply fall into, as he said, the largest revenue drivers, in a particular office or a practice group or an industry group. There's a more nuanced approach there that Mark discussed, like focusing on growth. But the importance of any type of analysis is you don't want to be applying your internal resources evenly across every single client you have. While that may be a strategy, and it's almost undoubtedly not the most effective strategy. You need to make informed decisions of which clients will have dedicated teams and a customized approach. Maybe the clients themselves will have a higher touch experience based upon their landing within some form of key client team. Maybe the team members internally for you will have access to greater resources or additional resources. Now that decision, we go back to change management, those decisions are some of the hardest. Lawyers, law firm management really don't like saying no internally. Lawyers don't like hearing no. They want the support. This is where you get back to some of the data-based approaches that you have, and communication with your people about the level of resources they will receive, that their teams will receive. But what will help that conversation is being able to show the growth projections for the firms, for the clients that you selected and you've identified within the firm. Making clear internally that these are talent capabilities that the firm has that needs to put to use, to serve those key accounts. And most importantly, it's that, the alignment that I talked about, earlier. If you have these thoughtful and data-informed approaches for how you're looking at your clients, how you're categorizing them, your talent focus, how you're developing your internal talent, a lot of those decisions on the back end, like how to allocate resources, where to invest, become a lot easier, because they're not new strategies you're trying to implement. It's not a brand new change management initiative you're trying to go. It's the next step in that strategic process or in that change management initiative that you've already put into place. So when we think about key accounts, we think about client growth, we think about alignment and how do you support your lawyer teams. There's a number of internal support teams that that are essential, but we think about knowledge management, marketing, and business development. Those three functions, and the way we think about it and the way we talk about it is knowledge management. Those internal teams are focused on making sure that the internal support functions know the internal capabilities, know the work product that is being produced by those teams, and not only knows it, but makes it accessible for all lawyers, regardless of the markets that they're in, the practices that they're in, their offices. So it's universal access to up-to-date information across practice groups, across client teams, across offices. On the marketing side, that once that information is gathered and the firm internal structure has that information, is what is the story that your marketing team is developing, both internally for all of the employees, all of the partners, all the lawyers, internal to the firm, so they know what the firm's placement in markets and practices and industries is, what its strategy is, and the progress that's made in advancement of that strategy. And then, incredibly important, of course, is the external marketing plan. What are we saying to the market? What are we saying in different regions? And it might be slightly different things based upon core capabilities, functionality, growth areas, and different strategies broken down by region. And then business development. Core function of your business development teams are to anticipate your current client expectations and needs and requests, but you also want them to be reaching out and identifying new business opportunities. So on this slide, you see a little bit more of a breakdown of those three functions. Really importantly, on both the last slide and this slide, we have these as separate functions. All three of these support teams need to be working together, and not only working together, but they need to be working with management, with all the other internal constituencies and support function, working with the clients and working with the client teams. At its best, this is seamless. When we go back to layoffs and why we thought the analysis that we've been doing and are doing now is so important is more than ever coming out of a COVID cycle where people were removed from the office. There wasn't a lot of face-to-face contact. That's starting up again, but there's a lower demand environment. Firms are falling behind on revenue targets, falling behind on budget. The quick move we've seen some firms start to make is cutting back on a lot of their knowledge management teams, the business development teams. Obviously, there's a lot of stories about lawyer layoffs as well. These functions, I think, have never been as important as they are now. There are technologies that can be leveraged to collect CRM information, client relationship management information, business development opportunities, on the knowledge management front to collect templates and new market standards. But in between that technology, especially as it's integrating and being fully accepted, there are the people in a lot of these support teams that are able to connect people, gather the information, and make sure it's disseminated. We'll move on to the next section. But I think the highlight point here is making sure that these three support teams are functioning efficiently and effectively, but more than anything, collaborating with each other and fully connected to client teams and management teams.
Right, and I think as you lead into the next section on the slides, Ed, I mean, what supports these teams more than data and technology? And I think we would suggest not the other way around. These teams are not around to support data and technology. Obviously, they work hand in hand. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of firms try to solve the issues that these teams solve with technology, sort of to displace the human element in some cases, or just to buy a bunch of technology that have a lot of different uses and sort of use cases, if you will, but don't necessarily seamlessly work together or give you enough. You still need people to sew it together. So as we move to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about data strategy and technology. These terms, data strategy, analytics, technology, thrown around fairly loosely and with different meanings. There are certain elements to a data strategy that you've really got to think carefully about. The most important thing really is that what you're building data for, or what data you're collecting, where you're placing emphasis on curating is what I like to say. Curating meaning making the efforts and sort of investment to get it in a certain way, to keep it clean, to keep it in a way that can be usable for the business. That takes effort, no matter what data it is, and you only have so much to go around. So that has to be the data that is most critical and most helpful and most connected to the strategy itself of the firm and on behalf of the clients, not just client data and all that, but client data about the business that can help the business run more efficiently and effectively for the clients and in turn for the firm. If that's not true, then you're going to spend a lot of time and invest a lot of money and effort in data and a data strategy that is at best suboptimized, and probably a lot more than that. When you start thinking about the data strategy, let's assume those things are connected. Security and risk management is clearly top of mind for everybody. The truth of the matter is it's really important. Obviously, if there's breaches and issues, that can be massively difficult, costly for reputation, and sort of just penalizing financially. And on behalf of clients, it's very risky. But there are tools, professionals, and processes that have been deeply vetted for all kinds of analytics, including the cloud, predictive, and machine learning. It's not sort of the Wild West. There are a lot of procedures, policies, technologies, and systems that allow professionals to keep a handle on the confidentiality and the risk and security protocols. Feeding into the data inventory, which I just talked about, knowing what you have, what it's useful for, and what quality it is, gives you a sense of where the gaps are if you can connect that to strategy and insights that you need. Data governance is sort of part of that data strategy that says who's responsible for getting it, who's responsible for keeping it, who's responsible for the data and security, or the security and risk management, and who gets to use what for what purposes, right? All of those kinds of things need to fit into that too. GDPR, California laws, et cetera, that are only getting more expansive for PII, but also just generally speaking, it's easier to curate the right data for the right thing in a firm if you've got clear accountability and governance and processes about who gets it, who touches it, who moves it, and who uses it for what. The most valuable use cases, as it states here, sort of both internal and external, are where they inform approaches and outcomes. What do you mean by that? Well, it's nice to know things, but unless you've got a clear reason why you're doing something or what you need to understand in order to take better action, that will just sort of be a little bit of a curiosity, right? And it won't drive real change in your data strategy. It won't drive real change in the business. It certainly won't drive real value for your clients. So aligning out a very specific use case, set of specific use cases, meaning I would like to do X. I don't know why. If I did, I could possibly think about Z and 1, 2, 3 and get the one that I really need and take action on that more efficiently. If you can get into that kind of rhythm, you'll be better served about that. And I'll be relatively short on this one, the technology stack, because most major firms have a fairly significant technology stack, many of them in the hundreds of platforms for all kinds of different point source uses, knowledge management, marketing, BD, business, client, portals, all of these things. And a lot of them form specific uses. Some of them had uses at one point, don't anymore. I'd say at least every 3 or 4 years, you really should be stepping back and looking at those things saying, hey, what is the ecosystem? How can we categorize them? What did we anticipate and expect they do? What are they doing and are they being used? What difficulties or positives do they have for us and how much does it cost, right? And if you can look at that whole ecosystem and say, woo, there are some we don't really very much use. There must be a reason for that. Some are causing problems because they're giving different answers. We're paying a lot for these. Are they really worth it? You can start to make informed choices about what the smallest, most effective technology stack is. And if you've got a lot of extraneous technology parts of the platform, it tends to cause integration problems all throughout, both running the business and responding to clients. So those are just some ideas and directionality around data and technology, infrastructure and data strategy.
In that technology service stack assessment, I mean, that can guide that really can inform and guide the analysis of, where should you invest. If you have enterprise-wide software that is failing, that is out of date, it's not fit for purpose, it's going to be easy to, well, not easy, but it'll be easier to make the case internally why there should be an upgrade in that software, that suite of technology products. We're asked often about new technologies, and especially limited budgets, where do we see firms investing? And I think the question there, like I just touched on, like the main point, if you need to replace a technology, that's where those limited, if they are limited, but they most likely are, these days, those limited technology budgets will be applied. The different firms have different appetite levels for trying new software which is not fully proven, whether it's automation or other types of efficiency-related software to leverage. What has been clear, and I think will continue to be the case throughout the year, firms, if they're going to be investing on technologies, they're going to need proven solutions. Some firms, certainly will be taking steps to implement like newer technologies and then invest the hours in testing a lot of that technology. But I think those are really going to be the exceptions and fewer further between. But Mark's point, I think, is certainly the right one. That is that is usually a significant expense for a law firm. It's amazing how many firms are paying licenses that they're not using or not using the way that they were intended. That assessment is always a good idea to see where you stand and where there might be more effective, more efficient, or less costly alternatives. So Mark, I'm going to switch over to our next slide. And actually our final slide. We kind of went through this and we're slightly over our 60 minutes. But I thought we'd move over to the last slide and just talk quickly about some conclusions.
Yeah, I think one of them is really got to be placing all of this in the context of how will the year continue, how will the climate continue. I think we believe that it's still going to be a fairly up and down, maybe a bit more conservative year ahead. When you think about all that's come, it seems like almost nothing else can happen. But then you have some banking crises, how that gets sorted out and how quickly that happens, and if there's any other sort of dislocation in the market, that will affect the psyches of the money systems and the deal flow that is out there. It will make people somewhat more conservative in how they invest, probably. So the likelihood is that the outlook remains somewhat conservative. Demand is unlikely to spike higher on a consistent basis. So we're probably living in an environment where budgets will remain somewhat tight. Talent and layoffs will remain a consideration, and we're going to have to find ways to invest that are not sort of massive, unplanned, hard dollar expenses, at least minimizing those. And so a lot of what we're talking about here, we think is going to be really important for the foreseeable future, certainly in 23, for those market conditions and the prospects there. And Ed, you think about that, you probably have to have a fairly disciplined development focus in that environment.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think with what we see is that whether the economy is booming or whether there's a downturn, pre-recession or otherwise, the most effective way to perform efficiently and outperform expectations is to analyze your business and look for opportunities to improve performance. And those are the calls that we're receiving from clients now on the topics we've discussed and others. So to look internally while keeping strong gaze externally on clients, markets, and expectations, I think is always the right approach. But Mark, with that, unless you have anything else, I think we're ready to end the session. We have no questions pending.
No, that's right, Ed. Thanks everybody for joining. Hope you've gotten a lot of value out of this, and look forward to seeing you on the next.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Take care. Bye now.